Even today, when the general standard of play is higher than ever before in the chess world, there's still room for the chess sacrifice. And in fact, I'm sure we would all like to engineer situations in our own games where we were able to sacrifice pieces to win the game. So my game of the month this time, for June 2016, is what I consider to be a sacrificial gem. But before we get into that game, I'd like to show you a few positions which I hope will warm you up for the main event, and which I think you can handily solve at home. Well, in fact, I'm sure that many of you will have seen these positions before. Welcome everybody, this is Andrew Martin, and it's time once again for the BCM Game of the Month for June 2016. And my first position is a very famous one. It comes from a game between Stepan Levitsky and the famous Frank James Marshall, one of the original grandmasters, and it's an old game from 1912. And we pick up play with white just having played his queen to g5. And after that, black played perhaps a slightly surprising move to Levitsky, rook takes h3. White played rook to c5, and now it's up to you to find Marshall's next move. What move did Marshall come up with? Well, of course, this is a very famous position, very historical, and I'm sure you know it anyway. Marshall played the bombshell queen to g3, a move which was so strong it forces instant resignation. And if you found that without knowing this game beforehand, very well done. It's an absolutely crushing move. There is nothing whatsoever that white can do. Black's threatening checkmate. If white takes with the queen on g3, then black has knight e2 check, and after king h1, knight takes g3, winning immediately, and just dropping back to the position after queen to g3. If white takes with the f pawn, then we go knight e2 check, king h1, and rook takes f1 is checkmate. And finally, if we just drop back again to queen to g3, if he takes with the h pawn, then knight e2 is another one of those glorious checkmates. So I hope you found that solution, and that brings me on to position number 2, which perhaps is slightly less famous, but it features an ex-world champion, Tigran Petosian, playing with the white pieces, and he's playing against another grandmaster, Vladimir Simagin, and this comes from a game played in Moscow in 1956. It's one of those positions where whoever is to move holds the advantage, and luckily for white, it's Petosian to move. Can you see what he did in order to win the game? This is slightly more difficult, I think, than the first one, and requires a longer solution. Well, the first thing we notice is that this rook is attacked, and white would very much like to just take that rook off and win the game. But there are a few checks, pesky checks, on the back rank which could make life difficult. So Petosian plays a forcing move here, queen to a8 check. And what he's trying to do is to pick the rook up on f7 with check. So if black plays king e7, white just takes the pawn on a7, and then he can take the rook with check. So Simagin has to play king to g7, and now the next move is beautiful. Bishop takes e5 check. Again, completely forcing, because the bishop's attacking the queen and the king. And when Simagin takes the bishop off, white has the splendid move, queen to h8 check. Winning immediately, it's a skewer, and when black takes, we have the very nice knight takes f7 check. Simple when you see it, but some players might miss that over the board, and of course it is splendid to look at, because Petosian has created a combination of true chess art. So if you got that combination, again, very well done. let's move on to the third position. And this is another very famous game between Edward Laska and Sir George Thomas, which was played in London in 1912. And we pick up play with white just having played queen to h5, and obviously white's limbering up for some sort of kingside attack, smash against the black king. You know, white's piling in with a lot of pieces against the poor old black king. And right at this moment in time, white's actually threatening to go knight takes f6, check, and open up fire against h7. So that is why Sir George plays queen to e7. And he's hoping that after knight takes f6, he's going to take back with the g-pawn and defend h7 laterally. So how did Edward Laska frustrate this defensive idea? Well, you probably know this game. It's one of the most famous combinations in the history of chess. Laska unleashed a devastating attack, starting with queen takes h7 check. An almost unique queen sacrifice at that time. Again, play is forcing, black must take. White comes in with a double check, and he notes that if black retreats into the corner, this is a splendid checkmate, knight to g6. So backing up, black has got to walk the plank, and out he comes to h6. Play then takes a very forcing turn, as white keeps checking the black king, harrying him up the board. Up he comes, and naturally when the king is entering the fray in this manner, it's unlikely he's going to survive, despite black's extra queen. So poor old Sir George had to walk the plank all the way into g2, and now white played rook h2 check. King comes to g1, and now king d2. Castles on the queen side would also have been a very nice way to finish off this game. So again, I'm sure the vast majority of you have seen that combination before. But if you haven't and you got it, you know, you've got a very good chess imagination. So the preamble is over, and now we move on to the main event. And my game of the month for June 2016 comes from the recently concluded European Individual Championships, which were taking place in Kosovo. And this game was played on the 20th of May 2016 between Daniel Dubov and Ante Burkic. Well, Dubov is white, and clearly he has a sharp and interesting style. He kicked off with the Queen's Pawn, and black decided to play a kind of hybrid of the Queen's Gambit and the Nimzo Indian defences with an early bishop b4 check, and white put his knight on c3. Black hit the bishop retreated, and now black embarked on a very interesting and sharp procedure by playing g5, bishop g3, and now the knight to e4. This is not new. It's been played many times in certain variations of the Nimzo Indian. It's slightly different here as black has played the move d5. I think we're transposing into a kind of Rogozin defence. All these different lines have different names. I think this is actually a kind of Rogozin defence. And of course, black understands that he's weakening his king side when he plays h6 and g5. But he's probably going to think about castling queenside in this position. And he's putting immediate pressure on c3, which white has to resolve. And Dubov decides to do this by putting his queen on c2, which is, again, a very normal way to handle the position. White's encouraging black to resolve the situation of the pinned knight on c3. I guess white's going to just follow up with moves like e3 and bishop d3. And black's also got to be a bit careful here that white doesn't suddenly strike with the move h4, which takes a bit of a can opener to the black king side. White doesn't have to play queen c2 in this position. He can also play rook to c1. But to me, that looks like a slight misplacement of the rook. I don't quite know where I want that rook yet. But okay, it is a playable move. There was a game between, as you can see in the notes, with Charlik and Movsesian, played in Czech in 2014, where black played h5 in a very similar way to the way Burkic plays in our game. And now white put his queen out on a4 and tried to force play by getting the knight in on e5. But after bishop d7, knight takes c6, black got a pretty comfortable game by taking on c3, maintaining his knight on e4 and playing bishop takes c6. And after queen b3, h4, bishop e5, f6, a very sharp position came on the board where black's chances were no worse. Well, going back to our featured game, white decided to play queen to c2 and black played h5. Well, again, this is kind of permissible. It's a further weakening of the king side, but it is a very sharp move. And black's thinking about h4, he's thinking about g4, disrupting the natural flow of white's game. Basically, white would just like to play e3, bishop d3, and maybe even castle short, and then think about opening things up with h4. Or maybe he plays h4 before castling. But black tries to interrupt that procedure by playing h5. And Dubov plays, if you don't know this variation, what might seem a surprising move, just h3, trying to hold black up. Now this gives Burkic the chance to damage the white king side. But in order to do this, he's actually got to swap off all his developed pieces. So while this seems an attractive procedure, just to smash up the white king side like this, because black's got basically no pieces developed whatsoever, it's actually impossible to get to the white king in this position. And white is in quite good shape here to open things up with the immediate e4. And we're going to see this idea virtually immediately in our featured game. So black, before he can even think about attack here, has got to consolidate and probably got to castle on the queen side. And as you can see, that's going to take several moves. So white, I quite like this for white. White's got some promise of the initiative here, and with e4, you know, he can hope to get things open and get after the black king stuck in the middle. So black now played knight to c6. And again, when c5 is available, and this is another option here, to block the c-pawn is a slightly controversial idea. But of course, it makes sense if we think about black castling long. c5 opens up the queen side, yes, but it makes it even more difficult for black to find a haven for his king than he does after knight c6. So c5 is possible, and I guess white would just play e3 there. And well, there was a game which I featured in the notes, fairly low rated game. I'm not sure how much attention we should be giving to it, but it is possible to play this line with black. But for instance, after takes queen c7, white played queen f2 in the game. King f2 might be better still, actually. And then white's thinking about opening things up, asking black, where are you going to put your king? So that might lead to difficulties for black, hence knight to c6. And now Dubov comes in with the move e4, an unsurprising move. Black takes and plays queen to d6, useful on one count because it attacks g3 and it brings black closer to castling on the queen side. Then comes king f2, and now another very natural move by Burkic, bishop to d7. Clearly black is getting ready to castle long. But I wonder whether the move h4 straight away was not a better alternative. And how would white meet this move? Let's have a look. We've got two ideas in the notes. The first variation sees white blocking the attack. If black wants to play queen g3 check, so be it. White can just move his king. So maybe bishop d7, and then is knight takes g5 check, knight takes g5, excuse me, possible? Well, queen g3 check, and wherever white puts his king, black's going to take on c3, rook to d1 maybe, and now queen to b4, recycling the queen back into play with a very unbalanced situation. I'm not sure whose position I prefer. I mean, on the face of it, it looks like white has got an initiative here. But the more you look, the more you realise actually it's going to take white quite some time to get his act together here. And meanwhile, black can think about castling on the queen side. For instance, a move like queen e7 and then castles. This seems as though it might be quite acceptable to black. So going back to the move h4, what about taking this pawn? G takes, and then taking it again, because that seems like a distinct challenge to white's idea, to black's idea. Well, after that, it turns out black can play f5. Very surprising move, decoying the queen away from the knight on h4, and if white takes it, queen f8. Slightly surprising combination, but I think one which is very good for black. So going back to this line once again, h4 takes, rook b1 to me looks like a better move, dissuading black from moving that bishop on c8. And now we just get a very unclear situation after f5. The queen comes in, the rook comes to g8, and after rook b2, defending along the second rank, black plays knight e7. And I don't know, again, black's position looks perfectly good to me. It's difficult for both sides to get their act together, but that rook on h1 looks locked in, and it's going to be for some time to come. So I think black should have done this, personally, in favour of bishop d7. So bishop d7 was played, and Dubov comes forward with c5, gaining time, which he hopes will enable him to build up pressure on the queen side. So the queen goes back to e7, and now rook to b1. And Burkic walks straight into it. He castles on the queen side. A move which looks horrendously risky, but he's obviously judged in his own mind that his queen side is perfectly safe. Well, it's not perfectly safe, as you're about to see, as white moves in with, again, the not surprising knight to e5. And now pawn up to f5. Well, this was a mistake. Not too sure what advice to offer black here, as his game is already quite difficult. But f5 should have been met by bishop to a6, a move which we're going to see in our game a little later on, well, on the very next move. But bishop a6 now, I think, was the most accurate way for white, and completely wipes black out. It's a beautiful queen sacrifice, and let's follow the main line where black takes the queen, and white's threats are already game winning, game changing, unless black takes that queen. Well, now we come in with bishop takes b7 check, king to b8, bishop takes c6 check. Black has to follow white's lead. In comes the bishop again. Another pawn is hoovered off the board. And we're just going to ask ourselves here, pause for a moment, how is white going to win this game? I mean, we know he can give perpetual check. Well, he wins it in the way Dubov actually does in the game, but which he shouldn't have been allowed to do, by rook to b2. The threat, very simple, rook across to b1, rook down to b8, checkmate. Black can move his rook, pinning the bishop. White doubles. And it's a little bit surprising that black can't get out of this mating idea, but he simply can't. I mean, if he goes, for instance, c6 in this position, we can go check, king, and checkmate. And going back, if he goes king to d8, trying to do a runner, he ends up being completely paralysed after rook b8 check, bishop c8, knight c6 check. And if king d7, well, I mean, the simplest is just to take the queen and go king e3. After which black is 2 pawns down with a wrecked position. So that was actually the best continuation here. And queen f3 is an imprecision from Dubov. But if that's an imprecision, then g4 is a catastrophic move. And that is heralding the end of the game. Clearly, black did not see or underestimated the move bishop a6. So if we just drop back, what could he do to head off this idea? Well, I think queen e8 was probably the best move. And the point of this is that black can defend himself after bishop a6 just by taking the bishop off. This looks terrible because white can play a move like queen e2. How the heck is black going to stop checkmate? Well, he stops it here by playing knight to b8. And now, amazingly, I don't think white's got a way through. If he takes on b8 and then takes on a6, black can play king a8. And he can actually crawl out of this mess by playing bishop c8. And amazingly, black's defending this. Queen covers c6, bishop covers b7. Queen e8 would have been a way to hang on after queen f3. By contrast, let's have a look at h4. Bishop comes into a6, takes on g3. Well, white can take this, takes on a6, queen to d3. This time, because the queen's not covering c6, the combination works for white. Takes, takes, takes. This is working because black can't cover c6. So queen e8 was the defence. That would have been the way out for black. As it turns out in the game, g4 allows white to launch this massive combination with bishop a6, and it's a move which strikes black dead immediately. There really is nothing to do here. Well, in the game, black bought the gift on f3. If he tries knight a5, then I think we just take. And if king b8, we just play bishop a6, bishop b5, rook takes, knight b7, mate, thank you very much. Black prefers to avoid this by snapping off the queen, but now we get this sequence again where white goes on the rampage with his light square bishop. And now it's just a question of how he's going to finish the game. Well, he finishes it with the elegant rook to b2. And seeing no defence, Burkic decided to resign this position. Let's take play on a little bit with a bit of analysis. Let's assume black moves his rook, over comes the rook, down comes the rook to b8, bishop c8, sorry. Then we've got bishop b7. I guess this is the reason Burkic resigned, because well, he's simply paralysed. He's got to move his queen to make room for the king. Then we take on c8, check. We take on c7, check. He comes to f6, we go knight d7, check. He comes to g6. I think rook e1 is clearest. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't resign, they will play this out. But you've got to show respect to a top grandmaster. These moves for white might look like a long combination, but it's child's play really for a strong player to find these moves. And after rook e1, black simply can't do anything. If he plays rook e8, we've got knight e5 check. And I think that wins the queen, because if he goes king f6, rook f7 is mate, king h6, knight f7. And if, going back to rook e1, he defends with rook f6, we've got knight e5 check. I mean, you could play the prosaic knight takes f6 and then play rook c6, something like this. I mean, this also wins because black hasn't got a move to his name. But knight e5 check, king h6, then knight f7 check. Black's got to take that, or he loses his queen. And now just simply rook d7. Problem for black is he's paralysed, he can't do anything. Rook e6 is coming, so black's got to defend himself. And now white can choose. I mean, he can play bishop d5. This probably wins, more or less straight away. c6 also wins. Black can try to tickle white with h4. We can just take it. Play g3. Queen takes h3, c7. Queen h2, bishop g2. The grandmaster, quite rightly so, and sportingly so, decides to resign after rook b2. Just recognising that the guy has seen everything and there's no comeback. But nevertheless, a very nice finish, and it's quite rare to see a queen sacrifice in broad daylight in a game between two grandmasters. So congratulations to Dubov on his creation. It would have been, I think, if we go back to move 17, slightly more exact if white had played bishop a6, because as we've seen, after queen f3, black could extricate himself by playing queen to e8. But nevertheless, let's not take anything away from what was a very entertaining game.